Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Today we have another luxury watch comparison test. Two 41mm precious metal blue dial automatic winding perpetual calendars from Audemars Piguet and Patek Philippe versus starts now. Let's take a quick look at these. The AP looks like it might be a little bit larger, but just because of the rigidity of the strap, it's floating closer to the camera. They're actually almost exactly the same size. But let's talk about the relative merits of these watches, because each one has a lot of charisma, but a very different appeal. So the Patek is the newer of the two. We may as well introduce it. Historically, in the 50s through the 1970s, Patek Philippe had references like the 699, the 725, the 843, and the 844 that combined an inline style calendar with a perpetual mechanism. Now, those were pocket watches. This is the first time that Patek has used that type of display on a wristwatch, and so this debuted in 2021. Really an evolution of the 5235 regulator. Big changes, though, in the movement itself, the calendar module, and the way the dial's laid out. So in terms of bare dimensions, this watch is 41.3 millimeters in diameter, 11.3 millimeters thick from lug tip to lug tip, 48.5 millimeters with a 21 millimeter spacing between the lugs. Now, remember here that the 5235 was 40.5 millimeters. This is a little bit bigger already. We're going to move out, throw it on my wrist, and it is platinum. The 5235 rose gold or white gold. This one with the top Vesselton diamond between the lugs is definitely PT950. The watch is large. There's no getting around the fact that almost 49 millimeters lug to lug and over 41 millimeters in diameter is huge for a dress watch, especially from Patek, which has been traditionally conservative with its sizes. That said, on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, there's really no issue fitting this. It'll slide underneath the cuff, no problems there. With a sloped case flank and 11.3 millimeter thickness, this is a dress watch, make no mistake. But with a blue gradient dial and a white metal case, as well as the harsh angularity of this 3448 style case and lugs, it's got a little bit of an air of a sports watch about it, and that's reinforced by the sheer presence of a greater than 41 millimeter watch on the wrist. It really does look like it might be a sporting timepiece. I describe it as an all-arounder. Taking a look at the strap, we have medium rectangular scale alligator leather and high gloss. You can see it's a dark blue, though not quite navy blue. We have a folded edge, a monotone stitch, calfskin on the bottom. It's a brand new Patek strap. We have a pull tab spring bar, so you can easily remove the strap from the case. And then we have a single fold platinum deployant clasp with a Calatrava cross. Taking a look at the case, I mentioned the 3448. Also, the 3450, these were perpetual calendars that were made from the early 60s through the mid-80s, and they used this sharply angular set of lugs that are almost Carrera-like in their profile. The Carrera lugs are totally integrated into the case band, though, whereas these are stepped out quite distinctly. We also have the cylindrical case profile of the old 3448 and the sharp angular conical bezel profile. We've got the Calatrava cross on the crown. The dial, yes, it's an homage to those four perpetual calendars I mentioned, but there are also some design commonalities with the 5235, and the big one is the vertically brushed set and graining. You can see that the brushed metallic pattern goes from top to bottom, a little bit like brushed stainless steel, only distinct from the 5235. Here we have that color atop the brushed base. 5235 had either silver or brown, depending on whether you got white gold or rose. Here we have blue, but it's a gradient blue. You can see lighter at the center, darker at the edge. It's a fume style fade, though not quite as dramatic as something as like a fume from Moser. Now, looking carefully, you can see it's got better balance to it than the 5235G or R for that matter. It's got a centrally located hour and minute hand. So unlike the regulator, here you read the hands from the center and the scale is radial. And whereas the 5235 has printed indices, here you can see that they are all hour indices that are made of gold and applied by hand. So this is a more expensive dial tangibly between the color gradient and the applique elements. It's also easier to read than the 5235. The regulator takes a little bit more work than this. Now, the calendar system, if you look closely, you can see it's called the American calendar unofficially because it has the day, the date, and the month, and it is a double-digit date. 4 different wheels are involved here, and this calendar system involved 3 separate patents. Just to give you an idea of the distinction between the 5235 and this 5236, the 35 has 313 movement parts. This has 503, so it is immensely more complicated. Now, you have 2 sets of coplanar wheels, which means you have 1, 2, 1, 2, and they're coplanar and concentrically located. So the outer disc on each side contributes to that double-digit date, and then the inner wheel on each side produces the day and the month. So it is an inline calendar system, and then we have a little AM/PM indicator. That'll let you know whether you're looking at nighttime or daytime, and so it lets you know when you should not be using the pusher adjusters on the case flank to adjust the time. Now, as we transition into morning, you'll watch the little AM/PM start to turn from blue to silver. That's exactly what it does. We've got a leap year phase indicator over at approximately 4 o'clock. Let's call that about 4:10 on the dial. And then we have coaxial small seconds with a crescent-style moon phase. The perpetual calendar doesn't need to be touched until the year 2100. The moon phase has a 122-year adjustment interval. We do have a hacking seconds function. You flip it all over, it is impressive. This movement, the 31260, and it is the PS, Petit Second, and QL for Quantième, or Perpetual Calendar, and Lunaire for Moon Phase. Now, this is 34 millimeters in diameter. It is related to the movement in the regulator, but you can see that the profile of the bridges has changed. Also, this watch uses a conventional 4 hertz beat rate rather than the odd 3.5 hertz that you find in the regulator. And that one is, I believe, something like 23,040 vibrations per hour. This is a conventional 28,800. And we also have a platinum micro rotor instead of gold, the platinum improving the winding efficiency over the regulator's 22 karat gold. And then the mainspring barrel produces 20% more torque in order to better handle the more power intensive complication. Again, being 34 millimeters in diameter means this movement can really fill out the case back. It's got an automatic winding 48-hour power reserve. When you combine the 6-position adjustment, the free sprung Gyromax style balance, the anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, and that Patek Philippe seal, this 55 joule movement is able to keep time to a factory attested rate of no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per 24 hours. So very impressive. You could see that Patek did take the easy way out in some regards. Taking a look at these individual train bridges, you could see that these inward curves are gradual and rounded rather than sharp and creased. So these elements were finished mostly by machine. Now, the way this probably happened on all the bridges is that the bevel was started mechanically with some sort of a milling wheel and then finished with a handheld buffing tool. So although there aren't too many ambitious elements, these rounded curves are not ambitious at all. We do have a mirrored rounded bevel that speaks to some level of hand finishing here. And then we have other agreeable elements, such as 2 different sizes of engine turning, maybe even 3 different sizes of perlage on the base plate. Lovely, broad, and deeply textured Côte de Genève. You can see the color gradient across these stripes is deep and rich. These were laid down by abrasive wheel, and they are supremely attractive. You can also see that there are some exterior points where bevels meet, and these need to be considered just as important as interior angles. You could see at the end of the balance cock, on the edge of the bridge for the reduction system for the winding machine, and then you could see additional points where bevels meet. Those sharp outward points are just as impressive as sharp inward angles. Those are difficult to achieve too, so I give them half credit for that, but really these should have been inward angles Philippe Dufour style for the price of this watch. Taking a quick look at the remainder of it, you can see that all screw heads are black polished, and a detail I like, all jewel and screw sinks have also been beveled, and then all wheels have been satinated. So it's a good looking movement, and again, really wears nicely, but large for a dress watch. That said, the competition is also large for a dress watch. The Code 11.59 Perpetual Calendar debuted with the Code 11.59 collection when the whole series bowed in 2019, and frankly, it was one of the few that was never objectionable from an aesthetic standpoint. It always looked good with its combination of rose gold case and Aventurine glass dial. Now, surprisingly, despite appearances, it's almost exactly the same size as the Patek. At 41 millimeters in diameter, 11 millimeters thick, and from lug tip to lug tip, 49.5 millimeters, with a 22 millimeter spacing between the lugs. I'm actually going to show you the two of them, crystal to crystal here, so you can get a better sense and realize that they are almost exactly the same thickness. The optical illusion created by the shape of the AP case is that it's larger. It's not. Thrown it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference again, you can see just as flat, easily fits underneath a cuff. It is broad though, at almost 50 millimeters lug to lug. This one's going to be just a little bit more challenging to wear on a small wrist, and I really do think that 15 centimeters circumference is the lower limit to wear either of these watches. Taking a quick look one more time in profile and down the barrel, roll it through. Okay, now the strap. An interesting piece here is we have textile externally, but then you could see on the reverse side that there is leather here. So it's a combination of leather and textile. And then we've got this large double deployant clasp. Now, it's a double deployant, which means unlike the Patek single fold, this one's less likely to pinch skin. That's a problem with big single fold clasp. We've also have a very well hidden set of triggers. So this clasp is a little bit more secure and closed with the twin trigger release system, both hidden beautifully and integrated for security. This can't just fly open due to inertia or shock. You do have to press both of those triggers. So that's a feature I like seeing here, and that's a sort of leg up that the AP has on the Patek. Another advantage is the way everything is put together. As you can see, we have screws that are used to fix the strap to the case. Screws and bars make for greater security than spring bars. Patek uses spring bars. Pull tab, admittedly, for convenience. This setup is more expensive and more cumbersome to remove, but more secure. Now, the Patek uses a historic case design, the 3448, and I approve of that. But Audemars Piguet looked to innovate, and as you can see, this case design is far more involved. It has a bezel that dips at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, and then flares at 3 and 9. You can see that there are many different contrasts between polish and satin here. You can also see that the lugs are hollow and buttress-like, creating a beautiful sort of prismatic appearance. The little bolts that hold the strap to the case, those are hexagonal, as a nod to the bolts on the royal oak bezel. And then you can see that the inner case here, the middle case between the bezel and the caseback, is a rounded octagon, another nod to the royal oak. Both of these watches are very old school in how their calendars operate. They use pusher adjusters rather than crown setting or actuators. Actuators would be like Blancpain or FP Journe. Crown setting would be like IWC or Ulysse Nardin. Both of these are very old-fashioned in how they operate. So you need a pusher tool. Now, taking a quick look, you can see that there's micro beveling inside the lugs and on both sides. The attention to detail here really is superb. There's also a lot less bezel than you find on the Patek. You can see the bezel here is prominent, whereas the bezel here is almost absent. We also have a dramatic multi-contoured crystal that bends in ways we're not used to seeing on conventional watches. You can really see as we bend the Patek Philippe how nothing much happens to the image of the dial, whereas with the multi-contour of the crystal on the Code 11.59, we get quite a bit of distortion and refraction that's unusual and beautiful. Now, the dial here is blue like the Patek, but that's just about all it has in common. It is Aventurine glass, and it has a couple of different focal planes. As you can see, there's this large lacquered chaptering up here in super dark navy blue. That bears the week of the year. It is a weekly calendar. Then we have the Aventurine glass dial base, which is a piece of precious metal, on top of which a sort of dark blue enamel has been created with metallic elements added to create the sparkle simulating the cosmos. We do have a perpetual calendar. What sets this one apart is the use of a photorealistic moonphase, in contrast to what Patek provides, and then the use of the weekly calendar. We also have an aperture style calendar, so we have the day, the date, the month, and then the leap year and month are coaxial up there. So you do have to focus a little bit more when attempting to read this calendar than when attempting to read this calendar. I will add that this watch is now available in white gold, so you do have some color options. Now, where Patek pulls ahead and really holds the biggest advantage is in the movement. Not that this JLC 920 based AP isn't a great movement. This is based on the 21 120, which was created in 1967 for Patek, Vacheron, and AP, and only ever used by those three companies. Today, AP builds this and finishes it in-house, but it does have JLC design roots. It uses a beryllium ring that runs all the way around the movement, supported by 4 ruby rollers. So it's actually a full 360-degree rotor, and the mass is just on one side. By placing those rollers on the base plate and using this beryllium ring, AP and JLC before, able to shrink everything super close to the bridges and plates with no risk of them accidentally coming into contact. That allows this base movement to be as thin as 2.4 millimeters. Now, taking a quick look, you can see that the rotor here has been skeletonized, beveled on its side, but just as impressively, it's been beveled internally, and this is where we do find those sharp interior angles where bevels meet, and quite a few of them. On this rotor, we find black polish, beveling, satination, 3 different finishes, and skeletonization with internal beveling. Supremely impressive. You can also see that although this movement is much smaller than the case in which it is contained, we have lovely stripes here. We have beautiful broad bevels that are actually brighter and broader than what you'll find on the Patek. We have a free-sprung Jaramac style balance. This is a 40-hour automatic winding power reserve. It's got a quirky vintage beat rate of 19,800 vibrations per hour, and then all of this pivots on 38 joules. The 40-hour power reserve is a little bit of an encumbrance here, but not super troubling if you wear the watch daily. The bigger challenge is that there is no hacking seconds, but then again, you don't need stop seconds on a watch that has no running seconds display. So all things equal, I would say the finishing here is at least on par with the Patek, maybe even slightly superior, but the undersized movement, the short power reserve, the lack of hacking, and the lower beat rate mark this as a product of a very different era. There are some nice elements though, especially the solarization on the crown wheel core and the ratchet wheel right there. Now let's talk about advantages. So with the 5236P, we need to talk about price first. This watch is $140,750 when it is new, but pre-owned it's $120,000 to $125,000. So there is some depreciation here. Plus, the price of entry, new or used, is going to be higher, and that is the first big advantage I want to bring to light here with the Audemars Piguet, which is a more affordable watch to buy. It's $99,400 new, and again, you can get it in white gold for a little bit more, so you do have some options. That's another advantage. You can get it in 2 different metals, whereas right now the Patek is just platinum. Now, if you want to buy this watch used, it's going to be $85,000 to $90,000, so it doesn't lose as much value in an absolute sense as the Patek Philippe. So a little bit more accessible from that standpoint. Magical dial. You've got the photorealistic moonphase. You have the Aventurine glass base. You have those bottomless twinkling simulated stars. This is a watch that captivates. There's nothing that is terribly, may I call it perhaps cerebral about this watch. You lead with the heart when you wear this timepiece. It also has a far superior clasp. Some codes come with pin buckles, but this one, with a double deploying clasp and trigger release, it's more secure and more comfortable to sit on the wrist, especially a small wrist, than the Patek single fold. You do have 2 metal options, so advantage there. Superior rotor decoration, and that by a mile. Between the 3 different finishes, the skeletonization, the interior beveling, the interior angles, it's got everything going over the Patek rotor, which is entirely finished by machine. And while it does have the advantage of being platinum for the sake of winding efficiency, there's very little that's romantic about it. Now, the AP also has a big warranty advantage. If you buy these new, this has a warranty of 5 years, this has a warranty of 2 years. I expect that Patek warranty to change any day now. They need to get with the times, but here it's still 5 years. That's a big advantage when buying a luxury product. I would also say this is a far more ambitious case design, although Patek is hewing close to its history, and it's true in that sense. Audemars Piguet does nod to history with the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak elements here, while creating something that is very new, very original, and very provocative. And while not everyone will love what they see here, the reality is it has an immense amount of nuance and care in its design, from the crystal to the bezel design to the mid-case. All of this is thoughtful, and it takes a lot of chances, and I'm willing to give them points for effort. It is also objectively beguiling. You will spend more time pondering this case, even if just to make up your opinion, than you will the Patek. And finally, This is a watch that is more impressively finished in detail externally. Whatever you think of the case design itself, the degree of distinction between the bevels, the satination, the polish, and the brushing, as well as the different textures, tones, and focal planes, the finishing is just a lot more complicated and difficult to achieve. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that this watch on the wrist, it actually sits just slightly thinner than the Patek. We're talking 1/3 of a millimeter, but still, for a watch that looks thicker, reality is the opposite. Okay, now let's take a look at the Patek Philippe, which I've already mentioned is my dream watch, and it does have a lot going for it. First, easier to read this calendar by an absolute country mile. This is a difficult watch to reject on legibility alone, whereas the regulator was difficult to read in terms of time telling. This is very simple, and I would even go so far as to say the white gold hands against the blue base make it easier to tell the time on this watch than it is on the AP. That may be a judgment call, but there's no disputing that the calendar here is a lot easier to read. Now, also important, the calendar is far more innovative. AP has been using a similar version of this system for decades. The only real innovation was back in 2016. We got the weekly calendar, whereas here we have a modern interpretation of the inline perpetual calendar, and with the 3 separate patents filed and the twin coplanar discs with concentric displays, just a very sharp, thoughtful, and clever way of doing a wristwatch perpetual calendar from a brand that you would have expected had exhausted every potential combination of perpetual calendar layouts. Patek continues to think of new things. Also, hacking seconds, we've got it here. It is wonderful to have that refinement, even if it's true the AP doesn't have seconds. It's still nice to be able to synchronize precisely to a reference time. Also important, superior anti-magnetic resilience. With the silicone hairspring here, Spiromax, versus a metallic hairspring here, you just have more resilience for the kind of environments where we wear our watch today. Home and office environments with high-powered electronics. If you've got a laptop with permanent magnets in the laptop keyboard, chances are you've magnetized your watch. This watch will not get magnetized that way, and that's a big advantage. Guaranteed accuracy is a bold thing. AP loves to talk about art and tradition, but they don't make any bold declarations about the accuracy of this watch, whereas Patek promises you no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day. Okay. Water resistance, not a huge distinction, but it's 30 meters here, it's 20 meters here. 30 needs to be the bare minimum for a dress watch. Also, movement, properly sized for the case. You can see that while both of them are beautiful, and in some ways, the AP is even maybe a bit better finished in detail, the huge disparity between case size and movement size here is unbecoming of a brand of AP's reputation and unworthy of the price of this watch, whereas here you can see it perfectly fills the case back. Also important, let's get a little bit closer here, maybe we'll do a different kind of zoom. Also important is that the micro rotor itself makes for far superior architecture. From an aesthetic standpoint, it is so much easier to see the movement for which you've paid on the Patek, as the micro rotor sits in the same plane as the other mechanisms, whereas here you've got that mass hiding half the movement at any given time. You also have a wonderful architecture here with this crescent down from the barrel all the way to the escapement. It has a wonderful profile. Remember this finish, which might be a little bit better here even, but then there's architecture, which is about visibility, proportion, the shape of the parts, and the way they're laid out in relation to each other. And on a movement architecture basis, this is far superior. Plus, it has that micro rotor visibility advantage. 48 hours of power reserve, 40 hours of power reserve. It's a small margin, but if it means not having to reset a perpetual calendar, it might be a very important one. And I have set both of these watches in the past. I actually didn't have my pusher adjuster, which is why these two things have not been synchronized calendar-wise. But in terms of actually setting the calendar, they're both antiquated with these many different dimple adjusters, but this one is far crisper to operate. It feels more premium. So which one of these do I prefer? Well, I will say that it would be a dead heat if the Audemars Piguet were in white gold, but given that it's between platinum and rose gold, platinum is way more my style, plus I adore this inline calendar, plus I really value the larger movement, the superior architecture, the improved accuracy, anti-magnetism. All of this, to me, plus the way the movement fills the case back, puts the 5236P ahead by a small margin of the Audemars Piguet. That said, Patek, you really got to adjust. Time to introduce a perpetual calendar with crown sitting. Remember, IWC and UN have had it for decades, and it's time to increase your warranty to at least 5 years like AP. So you guys let me know in the description below, which of these two would you choose for yourself? You know, but I probably showed my hand having praised this watch many times. That said, any given day, the white gold version of this might tug at my heartstrings a bit more than this tugs at my brain. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com. Let me know which of these you would prefer.